Another Addison arrest, Flores' continued free agent journey, and an absent vote of confidence in the quarterback. Let's get into the vibes. Welcome to the vibe of the Vikings, where we catch the real feel of Minnesota football. I'm Josh Kolodziejski, back with you for our second ever show, and it's been an ominous start to the 2026 offseason, just especially with a lot of things that were going on when we are recording this today on Tuesday, January 13th. And first, we would be remiss if we did not mention that once again, Jordan Addison is facing some legal troubles. This is the third incident since the wide receiver was drafted by the Minnesota Vikings in the 2023 NFL draft, the first round of said draft. It's his third run-in with the law. The first, obviously, speeding because his dog was sick and needed to get to the hospital. May or may not have actually had that dog in the car, but was caught speeding going 100 plus miles per hour anyway. And then, of course, the tone-deaf arrest the next year, a week after his teammate, Kyrie Jackson, is killed by a drunk driver. Jordan Addison is caught asleep at the wheel and drunk, sitting on the side of a freeway. He ends up finally getting suspended for that in the 2025 season. And then now, Addison has been arrested because of a trespassing misdemeanor charge in Florida. He was arrested on Monday morning. It is just a misdemeanor, and probably out of all of these kind of legal forays that he's gone into is the least worrisome of the three. So maybe that means that his legal problems are taking a steady and gradual decline. But this arrest, third time now in 3 seasons with the team, has really starting to show us who Jordan Addison is as a person. And even Kwesi Adofo-Mensah in their press conference today said it. 99% of the time, he is a good person that is great to be around. It's that 1% where you kind of decide who you need to be. And right now, Jordan Addison is showing that he is wasting his NFL potential and getting himself into trouble year in, year out, and it needs to stop. If you are the Minnesota Vikings, you have no confidence that Jordan Addison is going to be a long-term part of this plan, even before this arrest. And again, I don't think this is necessarily about the arrest right now, because it was, again, just a misdemeanor trespassing charge, and still no other details have been released. His attorneys are fighting it, but I think it is what the arrest shows. It's not the act, but it's what another charge against him shows, and that is that he just cannot right now keep himself out of trouble and cannot be smart as a superstar athlete that should know better at this point. And if you can't have that sort of heads-up mentality in the game, and if you are going to potentially now make yourself unavailable for the start of the 2026 season if the NFL gets involved once again and it's a second strike against him, then that's a problem. And now, I think even regardless of all of the arrests, you don't want to go the Cincinnati Bengals route, and you don't want to pay 2 wide receivers big-time money. You don't want to pay your wide receiver 2 big-time money because it prevents you from spending elsewhere, whereas right now the Bengals are pretty handicapped by the Burrow, Chase, and now Higgins contract. So it's not necessarily smart roster building in the first place to put a ton of money on Jordan Addison, but now I think this makes the decision all that much easier. And it's fun to have those 2 wide receivers. In Minnesota, we had Randy Moss. We had Chris Carter at the same time, but they were only together at the same time throughout the duration of Randy Moss's rookie contract. And once he really started to get paid, Chris Carter goes to Miami, and we kind of have a revolving door of wide receiver 2s. So even when we have had the best wide receiver duo that not only this franchise has ever seen, but perhaps the NFL has ever seen back in the Moss and Carter days. There was still a point where we decided against paying both of them and chose one over the other. And from a pure football skill perspective, if we're choosing Jefferson and Addison, choosing between the two of them, we've already made that choice. We've already given the long-term contract to Justin Jefferson. And from a pure football standpoint, that is the correct move. And now with all of the issues that seem to have been plaguing Jordan Addison off the field, again, makes that decision even easier. So what do you do with Jordan Addison? He has 2 years, 1 year for sure left on his contract. They're going to make a decision on his fifth-year option before the start of the 2026 league year. And I still think you pick up that fifth-year option. And I think right now the estimate is that it's going to be between $17 and $18 million, and that is all subject to change. But that's what it is looking like right now. So it's not going to be a major cap hit for that final year, but it will still cost a pretty penny from the Wilfs. Not my money, great. The issue is now you're going to be in a negotiating window this offseason with Jordan Addison, and I don't think you're going to really want to offer him a solid long-term extension, an expensive long-term extension that football-wise he probably deserves and probably would be able to get at the open market. And now are you opening a can of worms where he is going to hold out, maybe, heading into the 2026 season? And that is all speculation at this point, but we've seen a lot of players in the NFL do that when they've had their fifth-year option exercised and have not gotten that long-term deal. The holdouts are at the very least a hold-in. We saw TJ Hawkinson going into a lame duck year getting some Fugazi injuries and Fugazi illnesses that were mysterious in that 2023 offseason until all of a sudden he signs his contract and is ready to go. We could have that with Jordan Addison. And what does that mean for your quarterback development, whether it is J.J. McCarthy or someone else? What does it mean with the chemistry and the trust that he can build with his wide receivers if that's the case? I think a viable option is shopping Jordan Addison this offseason. Still, of course, like I said, locking him down to that fifth-year option so you for sure have him under team control for the next 2 years. But really looking into your options for his future in the short term and putting in serious considerations that might not be with the Minnesota Vikings. And maybe this arrest just hastens that process for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and or other decision makers that will be in the Purple's front office in Egan. Now, there are options that you have. And if our caveat is that we do not want to break the bank for a wide receiver 2 moving forward, some options to replace Addison in the short term, let's say we were to trade him in this offseason. I think if we do not trade him, he doesn't hold out and everything goes according to plan and kind of goes off without a hitch as well as it can for the next 2 seasons, then we can cross the bridge of needing that wide receiver 2 next to Jefferson when we get there. For now, we are going to operate under the assumption in this scenario that we're going to trade Jordan Addison. I don't know what the value would be, probably a 3rd-round pick, maybe a 2nd-round pick, and we also give a 4th or 5th-rounder. I don't quite know what that compensation is. But you get that draft pick, you get an extra draft pick, maybe a couple extra draft picks, and then you start looking for a new wide receiver too. And you've got an in-house option with Jalen Naylor. You drafted Ty Felton. I don't think either of those guys necessarily you would be comfortable with for wide receiver 2, especially because Jalen Naylor is in line for a little bit of a pay raise, albeit probably not one that Jordan Addison will be in line for in a couple of years, but it's going to be more expensive than he is right now. And I think you're putting a lot of faith in Jalen Naylor to be something more than what he has shown himself to be in 4 years with one of the best wide receiver coaches in the NFL, with Keenan McCardle. He's proven to be a good option. I don't think he's proven to be a number 2 option. Regardless, I think you'd still want to bring him back to be that number 3 wide receiver because this year he was getting open an awful lot. And he did take a significant step forward this year. Again, I just don't think that he would fit the bill to be wide receiver 2 on a competitive team in the NFL. So now you're looking at free agents, and you're looking at trades, and you're looking at draft picks. And I mean, there is the Tyreek Hill option where Miami, you could potentially trade for him, and you're in this weird spot where they're currently, eating most of the cap hit for that. But you're also getting a guy now that would probably have even more off-the-field issues than Jordan Addison has had, with some of the allegations that have gone up against Tyreek Hill. And you're also getting a guy that is coming off a pretty gruesome season-ending injury that in a player that was already slowing down probably will affect his speed even more, and he's a wide receiver that has made his skill set, his primary skill set being a speed wide receiver. Now that he's slowing down, will he still have all the skill sets that can make him a viable option? I don't know. I think that's a little bit of a risky move. I think if your options are going to be Jordan Addison, trading him away or keeping him, you get Tyreek Hill, then you just stick with Jordan Addison. Now, there are some wide receivers that are available in free agency that I think can be take a chance on me sort of guys that you get them in Keenan McCardle's system and he can try to mold them the best that he can. One of those guys is a young guy named Tyquan Thornton with the Kansas City Chiefs. Early on in this year, he was getting a lot of snaps and was being a primary option for Kansas City and for Patrick Mahomes, and was making a lot of catches down the field and could really stretch the field. Can you refine the routes? Can you make him even better? That is certainly a possibility to get Tyquan Thornton in the building. Romeo Doubs is a free agent, but I think his payday is going to be more than we would be willing to pay. So there are options out there. And then if you go to the draft, I don't think you want to spend first-round equity, but if you're getting extra draft picks for Jordan Addison, both of the Indiana wide receivers are intriguing, with Omar Cooper Jr. and with Elijah Surratt, who kind of throughout this playoff run has really made a name for himself as this guy that can catch pretty much anything contested. And if you have a quarterback like J.J. McCarthy, where you want to give him confidence and make him feel like he doesn't have to find the guy that is super wide open in order to make an attempt, like I think was the case with Kirk Cousins. He would not throw it to a guy that was covered in any sense. He had to be open in order for Kirk Cousins to make that read and throw it to him. And he wouldn't often, unless it was 4th and 26 in Buffalo when you have no other choice, he would not often give his wide receivers chances to make contested catches. I think if you believe that J.J. McCarthy will give his wide receivers that chance and try to throw his guys open, I think Elijah Surratt would be a good option for that. And we've seen, for all of the miscues that McCarthy has had in the accuracy realm, when he's gone back shoulder, those passes so far, smaller sample size, limited sample size on that, but they've seemed to be the most airtight of his precision throws. And you can set up a good rapport with Elijah Surratt as your number 2, Jalen Nailor, Justin Jefferson. If you did want to hope that Denzel Boston can drop, and Denzel Boston, a big-bodied receiver with some good route subtleties, not the best, but also a contested catch sort of guy, you might see him drop depending on where teams value him in the NFL draft. He's out of Washington. I don't know if he necessarily has the route running that you want, but you can refine that a little bit more. You can be a big-bodied receiver and run good routes. We've seen that with Ted McMillan. I just haven't seen that a ton yet from Denzel Boston. He can stem his routes pretty well, but the breaks in his routes are not as neat as you would like them to be. Whereas Ted McMillan kind of just does everything super, super well. And that's why I think Denzel Boston is probably a tier below McMillan as a prospect by most NFL draft analysts. But those are your options, and I think you need to make a decision soon. And if I am the Minnesota Vikings, then that decision is going to be to let go of Jordan Addison and to bring in a wide receiver, a young wide receiver with potential that can be cheap via free agency, via the draft, that you think Keenan McCardle can work with and fits in a different sort of mold than Addison. Addison and Jefferson kind of fill that same role. Get a guy who's a big-bodied receiver like Denzel Boston and like Elijah Surratt. For right now, it seems like we are going to be stuck with Jordan Addison and the consequences of his actions affecting our football team. Let's just hope that the 99% that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah talked about in his press conference can kind of start to round up through the rest of Addison's tenure here, and that he can stay out of trouble this offseason, because he is a talented football player, and I don't think he is necessarily a bad person. I just think he is continuing to rack up poor choices, and it is having an adverse effect on our football team. So that's the Jordan Addison news. We got that out of the way. Let's talk about Brian Flores. Last week we said, or I said, you may have agreed or not, that the only way I think Brian Flores is not the Vikings defensive coordinator is if he is offered a head coaching job with the Las Vegas Raiders. And I still, for the most part, think that to be the case. And I think one way that we can see that is kind of some radio silence on Brian Flores's coaching cycle search in this cycle. One of which is he's had one head coaching interview and one defensive coordinator interview. The defensive coordinator interview with the Washington Commanders, and then the Baltimore Ravens for their head coaching spot after John Harbaugh was let go. That's it. That's all he's gotten, which makes me think even more right now that a lot of the Dallas Cowboys are really interested in him. He's going to be a hot name, whether it's for defensive coordinator or head coach, makes me think that a lot of that was probably Flores agent driven. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe teams are just waiting a little bit before going after Brian Flores. But 1 week into the coaching cycle, it seems to be limited right now on that Flores front. However, I do think there's one other opportunity that has now opened up for Flores, and that would be with the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he had a chance to, I don't want to say rehabilitate his career, because I don't necessarily think he did anything wrong. I think rehabilitate at times can kind of give the connotation that you are fixing something that is your fault. I don't think that's the case for Brian Flores. I think he is rehabilitating himself from a league that has blackballed him for the wrong reasons, and that he is not necessarily at fault for that. But the Steelers were the first team to give him that opportunity. And granted, that was probably Mike Tomlin giving him that opportunity, but you've got an open door there. And I think there is an opportunity that there could be a chance that Brian Flores can become a candidate of interest with Pittsburgh as well as the Las Vegas Raiders. When it comes to the defensive coordinator position, with another team, I just do not see it happening. I think he has spent the last 3 years building the personnel groupings as best as he can that he wants in this room. Getting his guy in Isaiah Rodgers, signing him to a multi-year extension, and getting some good stuff out of Isaiah Rodgers as that cornerback. A value guy. We could have spent a lot of money on a cornerback and free agent, and granted we did with Byron Murphy, but for a cornerback too, like DJ Reed or Carlton Davis, both of those guys were free agents last year, but the guy that Brian Flores wanted was Isaiah Rodgers. And that's just one example of him bringing in his most coveted players that can run his system the best. Obviously, Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard. The defense has been made in the image that Brian Flores wants to make that defense. He won't have that. He'll have blank slates everywhere else that he has to go, and he'll have to start that rebuilding process over it. That's why I think, as long as Ziggy and Mark Wilf are willing to match any other price from any other team, I think Brian Flores, if he's not the Raiders head coach and he's not the Steelers head coach, he's only going to be a defensive coordinator with the Minnesota Vikings. And that was made even more clear to me today, I think, with the other news that came out about the Minnesota Vikings, and that is that Mike Pettin, who is their assistant head coach and works with other position groups and has been with the team since Kevin O'Connell became the head coach in 2022, he has decided to step down and retire. And one sneaky thing about this, whether it was him being asked to retire or making this choice on his own, it opens up, obviously, his position coach spot that needs to be filled, but also the assistant coach title, which is technically a promotion and a pay raise for the next person who gets it. So, if that's the leverage that you were looking for, if you are Brian Flores, it seems like that door is open now for that title promotion to not only be defensive coordinator, but also the assistant head coach vacancy that was filled previously by Mike Pettin. That puts you up the totem pole. It is a promotion that I think the Vikings would also get potentially comp picks for. I'm not exactly sure how all the Rooney Rule stuff works in terms of if you are in-house promoting your own guy, but that is an option. And I think the picture is becoming more and more clear that that is what the Vikings are planning to do as long as Brian Flores does not get a head coaching job. And granted, I think first and foremost, whatever head coaching offer that Brian Flores gets, he's going to take. I just think the only teams that I could see giving him that offer while he has an active lawsuit against the NFL would be the Raiders with Tom Brady and then now the Steelers. So I think we are hopefully getting into a more comfortable spot, in a more reassuring spot, where we can say that Brian Flores will be the defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings next year. All of that can change with the snap of the fingers, though. It could change by the time we're done recording this episode that, the Baltimore Ravens were so impressed and that they are bringing him in to be their head coach. But right now, only the one head coaching interview and one other defensive coordinator interview. Moving on to the final piece of news from today, the Kevin O'Connell press conference and the Kwesi Adofo-Mensah press conference, kind of the exit interviews with the media that both of those guys had. A lot of questions surrounding the quarterback. And we mentioned at the top of the show that notably absent in the answers for both O'Connell and Adofo-Mensah was a overwhelming vote of confidence in J.J. McCarthy, which to me has become the first sign that, okay, maybe they are not as in on J.J. McCarthy as we originally thought. Maybe they don't feel as good now seeing him with one full season as we thought. And I think you could have made the case, obviously, with like the Aaron Rodgers stuff and the source wars between like the Athletic guys and then guys like Benjamin Albright and Paul Allen who are saying, no, they're not interested in Aaron Rodgers. Yes. And then the Athletic guys are saying, yes, they are interested in Aaron Rodgers. There's obviously some different sourcing within the Vikings organization that for whatever reason, for whatever purposes, are leaking information to achieve certain goals that aren't necessarily aligned with the overall vision of those who have the controlling decision-making powers within the organization. But those source wars continue to be ongoing, and it gives me a little bit less confidence in what you can trust coming out with some of these beat reporters, because it seems like the sources that they are using may be using the beat reporters to spread their own narrative about how strong or weak the chemistry and relationships within the Vikings organization are. But saying it publicly, being asked the question directly, do you feel confident that J.J. McCarthy will be your quarterback in 2026? When Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has to hem and haw and say a rephrasing of the question and saying, I am most interested in what makes the Vikings competitive for the 2026 season. And now, right after that, he does go on to say that he thinks that J.J. McCarthy has the makeup and character to be that player at the quarterback position. He still does not 100% say that J.J. McCarthy is going to be our guy. It's a long way away from what Kevin O'Connell said after McCarthy's injury in preseason of his rookie year, where he says, Vikings fans can be confident that we have found our franchise quarterback. I think he has shown that, or something along those lines. That vote of confidence was absent in today's press conference, and that is certainly something to take note of, and I think we all have kind of checked that. I think even some of the national media are checking that and saying, okay, maybe there is a different plan for Minnesota going into the 2026 season. Kevin O'Connell offered a little bit more assurance than I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah did. And he also, by the way, said that the decisions for the coaching staff for next year still have not been finalized. So there's still, even though we haven't seen any heads on the chopping block just yet in terms of assistants, that could still be coming. But going back to J.J. McCarthy, he does say that he wants to have a competitive quarterback room. But when asked directly, does that mean you are bringing in competition for a starting quarterback? He also says, another rephrasing of the question within his answer, we want to have a competitive quarterback room. And I think if you were going to have a competition, or at least be confident at this point that you were going to have a competition, you would more outright say it like the Colts did last year after Anthony Richardson's kind of disastrous 2024 season. They were open to the fact that, yes, we are probably going to have a quarterback competition this training camp. And they found Daniel Jones, and that was the guy that they had Richardson competing against. Here, Kevin O'Connell did not make a declaration that directly. So we don't have a vote of confidence in the quarterback. We don't have a vote of confidence that we are going to have an actual quarterback competition. So where are we right now with the most important position on a football field? I think it's going to be J.J. McCarthy next year. And I think they're going to ride or die with J.J. McCarthy. But let's just, for the fun of it, look at some of these options. Because if J.J. McCarthy doesn't pan out next year, you're going to be looking in a pretty good quarterback draft class. Do you want to get ahead of that now and get guys with some well-known equity? And let's start with the most fantastical sort of prepositions. And that is this notion that we've seen on Vikings Twitter and Vikings Reddit that the Vikings are going to make a big swing because, darn it, Kevin O'Connell is on the hot seat. He's not on the hot seat. Kwesi might be. Kevin O'Connell is not on the hot seat. He's not feeling any sort of heat. This is a guy that is one of only a few people to win 40-plus games in their first 4 seasons in the NFL. He doesn't have the playoff win, but that's a small sample size. He is not on the hot seat. That can all change with a really bad season in 2026, but again, I think it is absolutely ludicrous to suggest, as I have seen, that that seat is getting warmer right now for Kevin O'Connell and that he is facing a lot of pressure and that next year is going to be a make or break year. I think all of that is baloney. I also think the chances of us getting Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, I think all of those are pipe dreams, and I've seen all of those suggested. You think we're going... You think that Cincinnati is going to trade their franchise quarterback who they have bent over backwards in the last couple of off seasons to get everything that he has wanted, to get T. Higgins signed to an extension, to get Jamar Chase signed to an extension, to get his players in like Kevin Garnett did with the Minnesota Timberwolves during the heydays then? No. Even if Joe Burrow asks to be gone, which he has not. No. You think in the glowing terms that Jim Harbaugh has talked about his quarterback throughout the whole course of the season, even coming off the worst game of his career, you think that Los Angeles Chargers team is going to trade away a top 10, if not top 5 quarterback in the NFL for draft capital and a guy that Harbaugh coached when he was coaching in college? No, you are out of your mind if you think those things. Sure, if those are available, if Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow truly are on the market, yes, by all means, trade 5 first-round picks and half of the team to get either Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert. Take that big swing, but I don't think the problem with these marriages we want between the Vikings and these star quarterbacks, I don't think the lack of action is going to be coming from the Vikings side. I think it is going to be from Cincinnati, Los Angeles, and Baltimore hanging up the phones. And I thought when John Harbaugh was still head coach and the regular season was still going on, I thought, okay, maybe these reports with Lamar Jackson and the Ravens not being happy with him are true, and there is a chance that the Vikings could get in on the sweepstakes for Lamar Jackson if he does become available for whatever stupid reason, whatever rift is being caused with the Baltimore Ravens. And right now it seems like maybe the rift has been solved and that the organization has chosen Lamar Jackson over John Harbaugh. I think that has been the case. So I don't think any of those three quarterbacks are on the market. And if they are on the market, then the general managers of those teams need to be thrown into the loony bin. But let's look in that same school of thought and some more realistic options under this tier of quarterbacks that I have coined as the replacement theory. Because if you get these guys, you have given up on J.J. McCarthy entirely and are going with a veteran that has at least some quarterback equity. Those three I think are unrealistic. If they happen, that would be fantastic. I would love it. The two that are realistic, I think, not saying that they're probable or even likely by any means, but Aaron Rodgers, of course, it is your destiny for Aaron Rodgers or Daniel Jones in a welcome back, buddy, sort of moment. Obviously, with Aaron Rodgers, we're not even sure if he's going to come back next year. The fact that Mike Tomlin is gone from Pittsburgh makes me think that if Aaron Rodgers did decide to come back, he might not be loyal to the Steelers or might not give them the rights of first refusal, and it could be a true free agency again for Rodgers, of which we know last year how much he wanted to come to the Minnesota Vikings. So I think that is definitely a possibility. But again, in this instance, I think you are saying, okay, we are giving up on J.J. McCarthy, because I don't think McCarthy in his third year now, with only 2 years after that left on his contract, on his rookie deal, is going to be super encouraged and super happy with the organization if they bring in a veteran like Aaron Rodgers, even if it is only for a 1 year, 2 year sort of situation, because that has kind of now eaten up all of the rookie contract for J.J. McCarthy. In that case, you are giving up on J.J. McCarthy. And in Daniel Jones's case, if you wanted to bring him here, obviously the problem is the injury, and obviously it is smaller glimpses of what he can be, surrounded and clouded by, even in this last season, a lot of shortcomings. Towards the end of this season, Daniel Jones, even before his injury, was not performing as he did towards the first half of the season. And I think you're taking a big risk there with Daniel Jones in what could be at best a marginal upgrade from J.J. McCarthy. You're giving up on J.J. McCarthy for a quarterback who is marginally better in Daniel Jones. Which is why I don't think that the replacement theory is going to be the best option for the Minnesota Vikings moving forward. The next tier that we have is the true competition. This is where you are having a competition, which, again, Kevin O'Connell did not say that they were going to have, but did allude to the fact that they could. And the quarterbacks here that you could bring in would be Anthony Richardson via a trade, a guy that Kevin O'Connell, we've seen, has a high affinity for, that reports are the Vikings tried to trade up for in the 2023 NFL Draft. We've all seen him talking to him after the 2024 game between the Colts and Vikings last year. Mac Jones, another option that has been a hot name ever since he took over for an injured Brock Purdy in the middle of the season and kept the 49ers afloat until Purdy returned and looked like the first-round guy he was drafted to be in 2021 with Kyle Shanahan. It would be another transfer of rehabilitation and quarterback whispering from Kyle Shanahan to Kevin O'Connell. Those are options. Those were guys that would have true competition with J.J. McCarthy in the camp, and whoever performs better with their reps during the offseason gets that job. And then another guy would be Kirk Cousins. They just reworked his contract in Atlanta. And this would be the option I would choose if we are going to be on Hard Knocks this offseason, because I think, maybe not even Hard Knocks, but a Hard Knocks where we go to different Vikings fans and focus on them and not actually the players, because it would be something that would tear this fan base apart if it was Kirk Cousins and his camp versus J.J. McCarthy and his camp, and then the naysayers of either of those guys in a third camp of their own saying neither of these options are good. It would be a civil war within the Minnesota Vikings fan base if Kirk Cousins gets released from his contract, which had just been restructured to give Atlanta that flexibility in March to release him without having to take a big cap hit, and then him coming back to play with the Minnesota Vikings, which he seems to have been hinting at in a lot of his interviews and in the quarterback documentary, that he kind of has regrets about leaving the Minnesota Vikings, especially now that he has found that his destiny for the rest of his NFL career is to be a backup quarterback. If you give him an opportunity for true competition, I think you probably don't spend a lot of money. Granted, it is Kirk Cousins, so he's going to ask for a lot of money, and he's going to maximize whatever value he can get. But you get a potentially capable guy that the organization knows and is comfortable with, but that, again, would cause Armageddon among Minnesota Vikings fans. And then these guys in this tier, Kyler Murray, Malik Willis, Tua Tagovailoa, I think are more of the pipe dreams within this tier, because I think those guys are not going to look at this quarterback competition, if there were to be a quarterback competition, and think that it is a one where they have a legitimate shot to win that battle. They're going to say, oh, we're going up against J.J. McCarthy. They're going to be guys that are going to be fielding offers, I think, from teams that are in more desperate need of a starting quarterback than the Minnesota Vikings currently are. I think they are going to have better opportunities for them to start, just like Daniel Jones did with Indianapolis and just like Sam Darnold did with Seattle. And those were obviously reasons, some of the reasons, not the whole reason, but played a role in those guys' decisions not to come back to Minnesota. And I think you'd have the same sort of school of thought with Kyler Murray, Malik Willis, Tua Tagovailoa. You could also bring in Derek Carr out of retirement. Wouldn't be a fan of that. And then another name that I think is interesting here is the Will Levis plan. Will Levis, who opted to have season-ending surgery in preseason after Cam Ward was drafted number 1 overall by the Titans. I think it is very interesting because he is a big-armed quarterback and kind of seems to be within that mold of a quarterback that Kevin O'Connell thinks he can fix. Whether he can or not, that's an entirely different discussion, but I could see a trade for Will Levis being an outcome this offseason. Out of those options, I like Anthony Richardson the best because I am biased towards him, and I think that Kevin O'Connell has a strong affinity for him, and I trust Kevin O'Connell's ability there and his judgment of quarterbacks. He is the guy that wanted Drake May, reportedly. So he obviously knows what he's seeing, at least to a certain extent. And then our final tier, it is the capable backups. And that is Mitch Trubisky, Joe Flacco. I think Derek Carr is where I actually had him here if he wanted to come out of retirement. Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. And I think it would be or Jameis Winston. I think one of those guys, obviously, the Giants are going to try to keep to have behind Jackson Dart, but they can afford to get rid of one of those guys. And Russell Wilson probably the likely one that they would get rid of since he is a free agent and Jameis Winston is under contract next year. And these are the guys where it is, even if you say that there is going to be a competition, Jimmy Garoppolo would be another guy here, by the way. Even if you say there's going to be a competition, that's kind of a wink-wink competition. J.J. McCarthy's job is safe, but in the event that J.J. McCarthy is injured and suffers through injuries, these are guys that I think would be able to carry the team through shorter stints of the season, even better than Carson Wentz did. That's the plan that I think I would go with. I would either go with the Anthony Richardson plan or I would go with one of these capable backups that you need so that it's not Max Brosmer every time J.J. McCarthy suffers a concussion or a hand injury. I think you put another full year of the J.J. McCarthy experience, and if it goes awry, it goes awry, and you get a clean slate to work with. Maybe Questy's not there anymore, but Kevin O'Connell probably is still there, and they get a high draft pick in a class that rivals, at least right now, and that could all change after the next college season. The 2027 draft class looks like it's going to rival the 2024 in quarterback talent. You get a high pick and are able to make something work if J.J. McCarthy completely falls flat on his face this season. You get one of those capable backups so that if we are in the playoff hunt and J.J. McCarthy gets injured, Mitch Trubisky, who has looked good with Buffalo when called upon, Derek Carr, who is a veteran guy, Joe Flacco, who wanted to be here, and Jimmy Garoppolo, who has gone to a Super Bowl. All of those guys can get the job done for you in shorter stints. So, that is what our vibes are for what has been an ominous start to the 2026 offseason, to say the very least. We'll talk more about it. We'll be back in a week with more from you here from the Grey Duck Sports Network. We thank you for joining us on another wonderful show. I'm Josh Kolodziejski. I want you to keep feeling the vibe, Vikings fans. And until next time, Skol.